The Billionaire's Unexpected Reflection. Attention, adventurers of the heart. Ready for a story that will send shivers down your spine? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments so we know what you think. The city roared with rush hour energy, its streets painted with streaks of red and white as cars crept along in the late afternoon traffic. Michael Sterling, a self-made real estate magnate, sat in his sleek black sports car, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. His phone vibrated incessantly on the dashboard. Messages piled up from clients, his assistant, and a dozen notifications reminding him of tasks he didn't have time to complete. He sighed, checking his watch. Another meeting, another deal, another race against time. That was his life now, always moving, never slowing down. He rubbed his temples, trying to ignore the cacophony of horns and frustrated drivers around him. Just as he reached for his phone, something caught his eye. Across the street, a woman struggled with her grocery bags. One slipped from her grasp, spilling fruit and cans onto the pavement. She bent to gather them, her movements slow, almost laborious. Then she stumbled slightly, clutching her belly. Michael froze. His heart lurched. The woman's face, though tired and worn, was unmistakably Eleanor. The air around him seemed to shift, the city's noise fading into a low hum. It had been months since he'd last seen her. She looked different now, her once vibrant energy dimmed, her figure softened by pregnancy. But it was her. Eleanor Hayes, the woman he had once promised the world, now standing alone on a busy street, struggling to pick up scattered groceries. Michael Sterling had built a life many would envy. A self-made millionaire, with an empire spanning various industries. People admired his determination, his grit, and his relentless drive. He was the man who always won, the man who never stopped moving. But behind the carefully curated image of success, there was a silence that clung to him like a shadow. He was good at what he did, no one could deny that. He had a knack for knowing exactly what people wanted, exactly what to say, how to tip the scales in his favor. His meetings were legendary. Some even whispered about his sixth sense for business. But no one saw what came after. The quiet drives home to an empty mansion. The cold dinners eaten alone at a table too large for one person. At night, when the city quieted and his phone finally stopped buzzing, he sometimes wandered through his enormous house, the echo of his footsteps, a stark reminder of how big and empty it truly was. The rooms were filled with the best money could buy, artwork, furniture, gadgets. But there was something hollow about it all. He had built his empire, yes, but somewhere along the way, he had lost something he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps he just didn't want to admit what it was. Have you ever felt like, despite having everything, you were missing something essential? Tell us in the comments. Sometimes, when he allowed himself to sit in the quiet for too long, his mind drifted to a time when life wasn't so cold, when the house wasn't silent, when he wasn't alone. He saw her face clear as day, like a photograph etched in his memory. Eleanor. She had been there from the beginning, when Michael's dreams were just that. Dreams. They had lived in a small apartment that smelled faintly of paint and the Thai food from the restaurant downstairs. The furniture mismatched, the heating barely worked in winter, and there were days when the fridge was so empty it hurt to look at. But they had each other, and back then, that had been enough. "Michael," she would say, her voice soft yet insistent, whenever he came home frustrated after another failed pitch or rejection. "You're going to make it. I know you are. You just need to keep going." Her faith in him had been unwavering, even when his own faltered. It was she who stayed up with him on those long nights when he couldn't sleep, poring over business plans and crunching numbers, trying to find some way to make things work. It was she who laughed at his bad jokes, who celebrated even the smallest victories, as if they had just won the lottery. There was one night he could never forget, no matter how much time passed. He had come home late after a particularly difficult meeting. His shoulders were slumped, his face haggard with exhaustion. "It's over, Eleanor," he had told her, collapsing onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "They said no again. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." She had sat beside him, pulling his hands away from his face and taking them in hers. "It's not over, Michael," she had said, her tone firm. "You've had worse days. Tomorrow, you'll get up and try again, and you'll make it, because you always do." He had looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for a moment, the weight in his chest had felt a little lighter. She had been his anchor, his rock, the one constant in a world that always felt a little too unstable. But things had changed. As Michael's career began to take off, so did the demands on his time. At first, it was just a few late nights here and there, Michael coming home long after Eleanor had gone to bed. He'd whisper an apology, kiss her forehead, and promise he'd make it up to her. And she believed him. She always believed him. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt. But the late nights grew more frequent. The whispered apologies became hurried excuses, and the promises, those well-intentioned, hopeful promises, never seemed to materialize. Michael was always busy, always chasing the next deal, the next big opportunity. And Eleanor, for all her patience and understanding, began to feel herself fading away. She never said it out loud, but loneliness began to creep in. It hit her in the quiet moments, the evenings she set the table for two, only to eat alone, because Michael had called to say he'd be late. The mornings she woke to find the other side of the bed cold, Michael already gone to some early meeting or flight. And then there were the weekends, the ones that used to be theirs, slowly devoured by networking events and endless phone calls. Eleanor tried to adjust. She told herself it was temporary, that this was the price of building a life together. But there were nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when temporary would end. And then there were the other nights, the ones where she felt a tightness in her chest, the weight pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She didn't know what to call it then, but it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. She didn't want to resent Michael. She knew how hard he was working, how badly he wanted to succeed. Not just for him, but for both of them. She wanted to be understanding, as she always had been. So she put on a brave face, swallowing her own worries to make room for his dreams. But there were moments, brief and fleeting, when she looked in the mirror and wondered who she was becoming. The woman staring back looked tired, worn, like someone she didn't quite recognize. It didn't help that Michael's world felt so removed from her own. As his career took off, so did his social circle. Colleagues, clients, and business partners who seemed to glide effortlessly through high-powered cocktail parties and exclusive dinners. Eleanor stood by his side, smiling politely and making small talk. But she never truly felt like she belonged. These were Michael's people, not hers. She could feel it in the way they spoke to her, their polite but superficial questions, as if she were an accessory rather than a companion. One night, after yet another event where she'd spent more time talking to the waiters than the guests, she confronted him. "Michael," she'd said upon arriving home, "do you ever feel like we're living in different worlds?" He'd looked at her, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" he'd asked, loosening his tie as he headed for the kitchen. She'd followed, hesitating a moment before speaking again. I mean, when we're at these events, your work events, I feel like I'm just there, like I'm a guest in your life. Michael frowned, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. That's not true, his tone dismissive. You're not a guest, Eleanor. You're my partner. Am I? She'd asked softly, and the question hung in the air between them. He'd turned to look at her, confusion evident in his eyes. Of course you are. I wouldn't be here without you. She wanted to believe him, but the words sounded hollow, like something he'd rehearsed rather than something he genuinely felt. And as much as she wanted to argue, to tell him how isolated she'd felt, she didn't have the energy. So she let it go, nodding silently and heading for bed, leaving him with his emails and spreadsheets. But things didn't get better. If anything, they got worse. Eleanor stopped going to events. She stopped waiting up for him at night. She tried to fill the void with hobbies, with friends, with anything that could distract her from the growing distance between them. But nothing worked. The loneliness didn't disappear. It simply settled deeper, carving out a space inside her that she couldn't ignore. The tipping point came one quiet Saturday morning. Michael was in his study, poring over contracts, while Eleanor sat on the sofa, staring at the packed suitcase by the door. She had been staring at it for what felt like hours, her heart pounding as she rehearsed the words she needed to say. When she finally rose and walked to his study, her legs felt like they would give out beneath her. She tapped gently on the doorframe, and Michael looked up, his expression distracted. "Hey," he said, gesturing her in. "Can this wait? I'm in the middle of something." "No," she said, her voice shaky. "It can't." He frowned, dropping his pen and giving her his full attention for the first time in what felt like weeks. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I can't do this anymore, Michael." His eyes widened, the words hitting him like a slap. "What do you mean? You can't do what?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at him, at everything. "I can't keep living like this. I feel like I'm disappearing, like I'm just here waiting for you to notice me, and I can't do it anymore." "Eleanor," he began, but she shook her head, cutting him off. "I love you," she said, her voice cracking. "I always have, but I can't keep sacrificing myself for something that doesn't even feel like ours anymore. You're building this incredible life, Michael, but I don't see myself in it." He rose, reaching for her, but she recoiled. "Wait, it's too late," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I've been trying, Michael. I've been trying for so long, and I just can't anymore." She turned and walked out before he could say anything else. Her suitcase in hand, the sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the house, and for the first time, Michael realized just how silent it was. Silent and empty, in a way he hadn't fully understood until that moment. And she was gone. He didn't realize he had been holding his breath until the blare of a car horn behind him jolted him. Michael blinked, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. For a moment, he hesitated. Should he get out? Should he even say anything? But then he saw Eleanor stumble. At first, it was just a slight wobble. Her hand reached out instinctively to steady herself against nothing but air. Then, as if in slow motion, she crumpled to the ground. Her knees hit the pavement, the groceries she'd managed to gather moments before spilling out again, rolling aimlessly into the chaos of the street. Michael flung open his door, stepping onto the pavement. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he couldn't just leave. The air felt thick, every sound around him muffled, as he took one unsteady step forward. And then another. "Eleanor!" he called out, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking her name louder might shatter the fragile reality before him. She turned her head slightly, Her gaze met his. For a fleeting moment, her eyes, tired, worn, and unmistakably hers, locked with his, and the years between them seemed to collapse. But then her expression shifted. Confusion, then recognition, and finally something he couldn't quite identify. It was fear, shame. He didn't have time to figure it out. Her body swayed again, her strength visibly giving out. And before he could think, his legs were moving. "Eleanor!" His voice cracked this time, louder, panicked. He reached her just as she began to fall forward, his arms wrapping around her trembling form. She was lighter than he remembered, her body limp against his chest, her breathing shallow. His heart pounded as he gently lowered her to the ground, his hand sweeping her hair from her face. "Eleanor, can you hear me? It's Michael, I'm here. Her lips parted. A faint sound escaped them, but it was incoherent. Her eyes fluttered weakly, and for a moment he thought she might say something. But then they closed. Her body sagged further in his arms. "Hey! No, no, no," he murmured, his voice trembling as he gently shook her shoulder. "Stay with me, Eleanor. Please." She stirred slightly, her head rolling against his chest. "Michael," she whispered, so low he almost didn't hear it. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he snapped, though his tone was more desperate than angry. "Eleanor, you just collapsed in the street. What's going on? What's happening to you?" Her hand moved weakly, drifting to her belly, and that's when he noticed it again. His other hand cradled the curve of her stomach protectively. Instantly, his breath hitched, his chest tightened, as the realization fully hit him. She was pregnant. Eleanor was pregnant. "Is it the baby?" he asked urgently, leaning closer. "Is something wrong? Please, Eleanor, talk to me." "No," she murmured, her voice barely audible, just tired. "Tired?" he repeated incredulously. "Eleanor, you fainted. That's not tired. That's—" He trailed off, exhaling sharply. This wasn't the time to argue, not when she looked like she could completely pass out any second. He had to do something. "Okay," he said firmly, as if convincing himself as much as her. "We're going to the hospital, right now." "No," she protested weakly, her hand gripping his sleeve with what little strength she had left. I don't need. "Eleanor, stop," he interrupted, his voice both gentle and unyielding. "You can tell me anything you want later, but right now, you have no say. We're going." Her lips moved as if to argue, but no sound came out. Instead, her hand slipped from his sleeve, falling limply to her side. Michael didn't wait for another protest. He lifted her carefully, his arms cradling her against him as he rose to his feet. She felt so small, so fragile, and that made something inside him twist painfully. "Hold on, okay," he said, his voice softer now. "Just hold on." He moved quickly, weaving through the flow of pedestrians who barely paid them any attention. The honking of cars faded into the background as his focus narrowed on the only thing that mattered, getting her to safety. When he reached his car, he managed to open the passenger door with one hand, gently settling her into the seat. He adjusted her carefully, making sure she was as comfortable as possible before closing the door and trotting to the driver's side. As he slid into the seat and started the engine, he cast a quick glance at her. Her eyes were closed, her hand still resting on her belly. She looked so vulnerable, so different from the Eleanor he had known. The woman who once stood by him with quiet strength and unwavering determination now looked barely able to stand. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as he pulled into traffic. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Every red light stretched into an eternity. His mind raced with questions, a relentless storm of worry and guilt. What had happened to her? How had she ended up like this? And why hadn't he known? Why hadn't she told him? He looked at her again. His chest tightened as he watched her breathe, each rise and fall of her chest both a comfort and a reminder of how fragile she seemed. "Just hold on," he murmured to himself, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Michael parked haphazardly near the entrance, not caring about the stares he received as he leaped from the car. He opened her door and leaned in, his hand brushing her cheek. "Eleanor, we're here," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" Without hesitation, he lifted her from the car, cradling her as he carried her through the hospital doors. The cool air inside hit him like a wave, but he barely noticed. Nurses turned to look at him, their expression shifting to concern at the sight of the pale, unconscious woman in his arms. "She fainted," Michael said, his voice sharp with urgency. "She's pregnant. Please, help her." The nurses sprang into action, guiding him towards a wheelchair. "Seat her here," one of them instructed. "We'll take it from here." Michael hesitated for a moment, reluctant to let her go, but then nodded and gently lowered Eleanor into the chair. She stirred slightly, her head falling to one side as the nurses wheeled her away. I should," he began, but one of the nurses cut him off. "You can wait in the lobby. We'll let you know as soon as we can." Michael paced the small waiting room, his shoes making a soft click against the linoleum floor. His mind raced, a jumble of half-formed thoughts and unanswered questions. Every so often, he looked towards the double doors where Eleanor had disappeared, waiting, wishing for someone to come out and tell him she was okay. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each one heavier than the last. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression calm and serene, though Michael's heart still leaped. He stepped forward, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "How is she?" "The baby?" "She's stable," the doctor said, his tone reassuring. "The baby is also stable, but she is severely malnourished and exhausted. We're giving her fluids and monitoring her closely. She'll need proper rest and nutrition going forward, but for now, she's doing okay." Michael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed over him like a wave. "Thank you. Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "She's resting now, but you can sit with her. Just try to keep things quiet. She needs rest more than anything." Michael followed the doctor down the corridor, his heart pounding with every step. When they reached the room, he hesitated at the doorway for a moment, his hand resting on the frame. Eleanor lay in the bed, her face pale but peaceful, her hands clasped over her stomach. She looked so small, so fragile, and it sent a pang of guilt through him. He entered silently, pulling a chair closer to the bed before sitting down. For a while, he simply watched her breathe. He wanted to say something, to reach out and touch her hand, but the words caught in his throat. As he sat there, the faint murmur of voices drifted from the hallway. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the words were impossible to ignore. "She doesn't have insurance that covers all of this," a nurse said softly. "Her bills are months overdue. I don't know how she's been managing." "I heard she's been living in her car," another voice responded. "Poor thing. And she's pregnant, too. It's a miracle she's here." Michael's stomach churned. Living in her car? Overdue bills? He turned his gaze back to Eleanor, his chest tightening. How had things gotten so bad? How had she ended up here, alone, struggling and barely surviving? He clenched his jaw as he stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. He moved closer to the bed, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Eleanor, how did it come to this?" Michael asked, his voice low but thick with emotion. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes slowly fluttered open, her gaze unfocused. Then she turned her head, her eyes fixed on the window. "Because I couldn't," she said softly. "Not to you." "Not to me?" he repeated, stepping closer. "Eleanor, you're living in your car. You're pregnant, for goodness sake. Why didn't you say anything?" Her hand tightened slightly on her stomach, and she exhaled shakily. "Because I didn't think you'd care, Michael." Her voice tinged with something he couldn't quite identify. "Not after everything." Her words hit him harder than he expected. "Eleanor," his voice laden with guilt. "You know that's not true." "Do I?" she asked, turning her head to look at him. Her eyes were tired, her expression unreadable. "You barely noticed me back then, Michael. Why would this be any different?" He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She wasn't wrong. He had failed her once, and the weight of that failure pressed down on him now, heavier than ever. Eleanor sighed, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said softly. "After I left, I thought I could rebuild. I thought I could make a new life for myself." "What happened?" he asked softly, leaning closer. She was silent for a moment before speaking again. "I lent my savings to my cousin, Sophia. She was supposed to pay me back, but then she lost her job. And then my job was cut, and I couldn't keep up with rent. I tried to make it work, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "One thing after another. Eventually, I just couldn't afford the apartment anymore. I ended up in my car. It broke down a few weeks ago." Michael looked at her, his chest tightening with every word. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked again, his voice quieter this time. "Because I didn't want to," she said simply. Her eyes met his. "I didn't want you to see me like this, Michael." "But..." She shook her head, cutting him off. "I've been surviving, Michael. Barely. But I've been doing it. And I didn't need you to show up to fix things. Not after everything." She had every right to feel that way. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, as he tried to process everything she had told him. For the first time in years, he saw the cracks in the life he had built, the places where he had failed. Not just her, but himself. "I'm sorry for everything." She didn't respond. Her eyes closed again as exhaustion claimed her. Michael remained there, watching her breathe. And for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had lost, of what he had let slip through his fingers. And for the first time, he realized how much he wanted, needed to fix it. A new chapter, revelations and redemption in this video. Have you ever had to face the consequences of your past choices? Share your experiences in the comments. Over the next few days, Michael visited the hospital regularly to see Eleanor. She seemed better now. Her color had returned, and her movements were less sluggish. Still, the air between them remained thick, a silent tension neither had dared to break yet. A nurse bustled in, smiling warmly, as she helped Eleanor adjust her gown for the ultrasound. Michael sat in the chair beside Eleanor, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, trying to appear calm, though he felt his chest would explode. Eleanor lay back on the examination table, her shirt pulled up just enough to reveal her rounded belly. The nurse applied a cold gel to her stomach, and the room filled with the rhythmic swoosh of the baby's heartbeat. Michael's breath hitched at the sound. It was so steady, so real. He couldn't stop staring at the monitor, the faint outline of the tiny life growing inside her. It was surreal, like something out of a dream. He didn't know what to say, so he remained silent, his eyes glued to the screen. The doctor walked in, all smiles, and with a clipboard in hand. "Ah, there's the little one," he said cheerfully, looking at the monitor. "Looks healthy and right on track. Congratulations, Dad." Michael blinked. His heart stopped for a split second. "What?" The word came out louder than he intended, cutting through the soft rhythm of the room. He turned his head to Eleanor, his eyes wide. What did he just say? The doctor, oblivious to the sudden tension, chuckled lightly. "I said congratulations, you have a healthy baby in there." Michael turned back to Eleanor, his mind reeling. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her silence was deafening, and in that moment, he knew. Eleanor, is the baby mine? Still, she said nothing, but her eyes flickered. A brief, involuntary movement that confirmed everything. Michael felt as if the floor had shifted beneath him. The air in the room felt thinner, harder to breathe. His hands gripped the armrests as he tried to process what he had just learned. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was low, barely controlled. He didn't know if he was more hurt or angry, perhaps both. Why didn't you think I had a right to know? Eleanor turned her head slightly, her expression wary. Because it wouldn't have mattered. You barely noticed me back then, Michael. Why would this be any different? He winced at her words, as if they had struck a nerve he didn't even know he had. That's not fair, he said, shaking his head. You know that's not fair. It isn't? She retorted, her voice sharper now. She pushed herself up slightly, wincing as she adjusted her position. You weren't there, Michael. You weren't there when I needed you, when we were supposed to be building a life together. You were always too busy. Too busy for me. Too busy for anything that didn't revolve around your work. And now you think you can just show up and fix everything. Her words left him reeling, a storm of emotion swirling in his chest. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to make her see that he wasn't that man anymore, or at least that he didn't want to be. I let you go because I thought it was what you needed. I thought I wasn't enough for you. But I see it now. I wasn't even there when you needed me most. And I'm sorry for that, Eleanor. I truly am. She looked at him, her expression softening slightly, though the tension in her shoulders didn't lessen. It's not that simple, Michael. This isn't about apologies. It's about responsibility. About showing up. And you can't just show up now and expect me to believe you've changed. I'm not asking you to believe anything, he said quickly. I'm asking for a chance to prove it. To prove that I want to be here. For you. For the baby. Not out of obligation. Not because I have to. But because I want to. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, her tired eyes shining with unshed tears, as if searching his face for some shred of certainty, some proof that his words were real. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke, cracking under the weight of her vulnerability. I can't do this alone, she whispered, her shoulders slumping as if the admission itself was too heavy to bear. A raw plea born of exhaustion, fear, and the crushing loneliness that had followed her through every dark night in her car. You won't have to, he said immediately. I promise, Eleanor. Whatever you need, I'll be there. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded faintly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Okay, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Okay. Michael felt a strange mixture of relief and fierce determination. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. He felt like he had a chance to make things right, not just for Eleanor, but for the life they had created together. He wasn't going to let that slip away from him again. Rebuilding, together. Small gestures, big changes. Share your thoughts. What was the most impactful turning point in their conversation? The following weeks were a whirlwind of changes, most of them initiated by Michael. He wasn't entirely sure where to start, but he knew he couldn't let Eleanor struggle alone. Not when he had the resources to make a difference. Not when he was determined to be the man she and the baby needed. His first priority was to get her somewhere safe. He spent hours on the phone with real estate agents, insisting they find an apartment in a quiet neighborhood close to the hospital. When he finally showed Eleanor the place, her reaction took him by surprise. It's too much, Michael, she said, standing in the doorway of the sunlit living room. Her hands rested protectively on her belly. You don't have to do all of this. Yes, I do, he said, moving closer to her. Eleanor, you need a comfortable place. Somewhere. This isn't me trying to fix everything overnight. I'm just trying to make things a little easier for you. For both of us. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, and he could see the hesitation in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said, almost grudgingly. "Thank you." But Michael didn't stop there. He covered her medical bills without a second thought, ensuring she didn't have to worry about the mounting expenses that had been burdening her. And while the grand gestures mattered, it was the small ones that began to make a difference. It was an unmitigated disaster. He'd seen an online tutorial, convinced he could handle something simple like pasta. But somehow the sauce ended up burnt. The noodles stuck in a sticky clump, and the entire kitchen smelled of smoke. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching him with an amused smile, as he frantically waved a dish towel at the smoke detector. "You know," she said, stifling a laugh, "there's an amazing invention called takeout. You might want to look into it." Michael turned to her, his cheeks flushed, not just from the heat of the stove, but from the embarrassment of his failed attempt. "I was trying to do something nice," he mumbled, though the corners of his mouth curved into a reluctant smile. She stepped closer, shaking her head. "Well, I appreciate the effort," she said, taking the spoon from his hand. "But next time, perhaps stick to salad." They both laughed, the sound breaking the tension that had lingered between them for so long. He also made it a point to accompany her to every medical appointment, sitting by her side in the waiting room and asking questions during checkups. At first, Eleanor seemed surprised by his interest. Her eyebrows would lift slightly when he inquired about due dates and feeding schedules. But over time, her surprise softened into something else, perhaps gratitude, or even trust. "You don't have to come to all of these, you know," she said one afternoon as they left the clinic. She adjusted her coat, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Most men would leave these things to the mothers." "I'm not most men," he replied simply, holding the door for her. "And besides, this isn't just about you. It's about us both figuring this out together." She didn't answer right away, but the faint smile on her lips told him enough. Their conversations grew easier, the silences between them less heavy. Michael found himself looking forward to their time together, even the mundane moments. He started spending more time at her apartment, taking her grocery shopping, helping her organize baby things, and simply being there. Slowly but surely, the walls Eleanor had built around herself began to come down. One evening, as they sat on the sofa after dinner, takeout this time, Michael looked at her, his heart heavy with something he couldn't name. She was folding tiny onesies, her hands moving with the kind of care that spoke volumes about the love she already felt for the baby. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. She looked up, her hands pausing mid-fold. "Yes?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing patterns on the edge of the coffee table. "I need to tell you something." Her brow furrowed slightly, and she set the onesie aside. "Okay," she said, her tone cautious. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I thought if I succeeded, if I built this life for us, it would make me worthy of you. I thought it would make everything better, but all it did was push you away." Eleanor's expression softened, and she leaned back slightly, her arms resting in her lap. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling, "I never needed you to be perfect. I never needed the big house or the fancy job or any of that." She blinked, and he realized her eyes were shining with tears. "I just needed you to try," her voice cracking. "That's all I ever wanted." His chest tightened, the weight of her words settling over him like a blanket. "I am trying now," his voice barely a whisper. "I know it's late, too late, perhaps, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, and then, slowly, she nodded. "I know," she said softly. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a step forward. And for the first time in years, Michael felt like he was finally where he was supposed to be, and that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward together. A new dawn. The family. He always dreamed of. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. What was your favorite moment of Michael and Eleanor rebuilding their relationship? Comment below. The call came in the middle of the night. Michael had just fallen asleep when his phone vibrated on the nightstand, the sound sharp and insistent in the quiet. Drowsily, he grabbed it, squinting at the screen. Eleanor's name flashed, and his heart stopped for a second before leaping. "Eleanor," he answered, his voice tight with concern. "It's time," she said, her words rushed and shaky. "I think it's happening, Michael. I'm scared." "Don't move," he said, already out of bed and pulling on his shoes. "I'm on my way. Just breathe, okay? I'll be there in 10 minutes. The drive to her apartment felt like the longest 10 minutes of his life. Every red light, every slow car in front of him, squeezed his chest with frustration. When he reached her building, his hands were trembling on the steering wheel. He found her sitting on the sofa, her face pale and glistening with sweat, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the armrest. "Michael," she said on a sharp exhale as he rushed to her side. "I think it's too early." "It's okay," he said, crouching beside her and taking her free hand. "We'll get through this. Come on, I'll get you to the hospital." He helped her to her feet, moving carefully but swiftly. She winced with each step, clutching his arm tightly as they made their way to the car. He settled her into the passenger seat, his hand remaining on her shoulder for a moment. "We got this," he said, though his own heart pounded in his chest. The hospital was a blur of hurried movements and hushed voices. Nurses and doctors guided them through the corridors to a delivery room, their instructions calm but urgent. Michael stayed by Eleanor's side, holding her hand as she gritted her teeth. With each contraction, her grip was like a vice, and he didn't care that it felt like she might break his fingers. "You're doing great," he whispered, pushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "Just a little longer." She shot him a look between breaths. "Don't say, 'just a little longer,' unless you're the one doing this." Michael couldn't help but chuckle, though his voice was tight with emotion. "Fair point," he said, "but you're still amazing." The hours passed in a haze of tension and exhaustion. Minutes stretched and blurred, and then finally, the sound that shattered the silence, the first sharp, piercing cry of their daughter. Michael's breath hitched as the nurse handed the tiny, trembling bundle to Eleanor. Eleanor's expression instantly softened. Her exhaustion vanished as she gazed down at the baby. Michael stared. His chest tightened as a wave of emotion washed over him. He hadn't expected to feel so much all at once. Joy, awe, a profound, overwhelming love that squeezed his throat and made his eyes sting. "She's perfect," Eleanor whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks as she gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Michael leaned closer, his own tears threatening to fall. "Yes, she really is." In that moment, everything else faded away. The regrets, the mistakes, the years of distance. All that mattered was the tiny life they had brought into the world and the unspoken promise to do better, to be better for her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. With the same determination he had once reserved for boardroom deals, he read every parenting book he could find. He asked the nurses a million questions and watched endless tutorials on caring for a newborn. The first time he tried to swaddle the baby was a disaster. The blanket ended up in an awkward bunch, and the baby squirmed free almost instantly. "How do they make it look so easy in the videos?" he mumbled, frowning as he tried again. Eleanor, sitting nearby with a cup of tea, burst out laughing. "You're overthinking it," she said, setting her cup down. "Here, let me show you." She guided his hands, showing him how to fold the blanket just right. When the baby was finally snug in her swaddle, Michael grinned triumphantly. "Look at that," he said, looking at Eleanor. "We make a good team." "Don't get cocky," she teased. though there was a warmth in her smile that hadn't been there in a long time. They found their rhythm, slowly navigating the chaos of new parenthood together. There were sleepless nights filled with late-night feedings and diaper changes. Quiet mornings, where they exchanged yawns and laughs over cold coffee, and afternoons spent watching their daughter sleep peacefully in her Moses basket. One night, as Michael rocked the baby to sleep after a particularly fussy spell, Eleanor appeared at the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, a soft smile on her face. "You're good at this," she said softly. Michael looked up, surprised. "I'm trying," he said, his voice low so as not to wake the baby. "I still feel like I'm winging it half the time." "Welcome to parenthood," Eleanor said, with a small laugh, stepping into the room. She stood beside him, her gaze drifting to the baby in his arms. "But seriously, Michael, you're doing a good job." The sincerity in her voice squeezed his chest. He looked at her, his expression soft. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." Over time, the barriers between them continued to erode. They began taking walks in the park with the baby in her stroller, sharing quiet moments as they watched her giggle at the trees and passing dogs. They talked more about the baby, about their hopes, and even about the things they had avoided for so long. One evening, as they sat together on the sofa, their daughter sleeping soundly in her crib, Michael turned to Eleanor. "You know," he began, his voice hesitant, "I never thought I'd get a second chance with you. With all of this." Eleanor looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled softly. "You earned it," she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a step forward. And as they sat there, the warm quiet of the moment settled over them. Michael realized that this messy, imperfect but beautiful life was everything he had ever truly wanted. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. If this story moved you, give us a thumbs up and share your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next video.